Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're so glad you're with us. You've sent in just a fantastic stack of sources, articles, research, even your own notes. And they paint a picture of, well, a real whirlwind of activity across the globe, just in the last few days, roughly September 10th to the 14th, 2025.
That's right. And our job today really is to cut through all that noise. We want to give you that shortcut,
Yeah,
to being truly well-informed, not just telling you what happened, but pulling out those crucial threads that connect everything, showing you why it actually matters.
exactly. We're talking about, well, everything. Political assassinations, global protests,
Big tech shakeups, yeah.
environmental crises, major shifts in how countries are relating to each other. We've dug through these fantastic sources you shared and pulled out the really important nuggets.
Yeah, get ready for maybe a few aha moments. We're diving deep into some developments that are genuinely shaping our world. Lots to connect.
Okay, let's dive in. Our first big theme, it seems, really hits on these escalating political tensions we're seeing, both, domestically and internationally. And unfortunately, it starts with a really shocking event right here in the U.S.
Yeah, on September 10th, the conservative activist Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. It happened at a campus event in Orem, Utah.
And this just immediately reignited this really intense debates in the U.S. about political violence, about online radicalization.
What's really striking and concerning is how fast the graphic video of the attack spread, almost instantly. And that didn't just fuel grief and anger, which you'd expect, but also a lot of disinformation. Very quickly.
Right.
By September 12th, so just a couple of days later, they arrested a suspect, a 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson. Authorities indicated the motive seemed to stem from deep-seated anger about Kirk's beliefs.
So the White House, other prominent figures calling for restraint, for unity, and campuses where Kirk often spoke, they started reviewing their safety protocols for events. Understandably.
Yep.
But this feels like more than just one tragic incident, doesn't it? It feels like it's deepening these concerns. Concerns that, the polarization we see, especially around elections, combined with how fast violent images spread online, it's eroding the norms against political violence.
Absolutely. It poses a really difficult question, I think. How do societies even manage these intense partisan divides, especially when information, even really graphic stuff, spreads instantaneously online and potentially influences, actual acts of violence?
It's a huge challenge. And depressingly, it's not an isolated thing.
Yeah.
If we look across the Atlantic, similar tensions were playing out in London.
Right. On September 13th, there was a mass far-right demonstration in central London. Thousands gathered. It really just highlights Britain's ongoing struggles with identity, with immigration, the whole post-Brexit landscape.
And these demonstrators, they were met by significant counter-protests.
Right.
Right near Parliament, Trafalgar Square. Police were out in force, setting up cordons, making arrests, things like offensive weapons, public order offenses.
Yeah, analysts are saying this mobilization really underscores how things like economic pressure, online radicalization, they just keep fueling this volatility.
So when you put these two things together, the shooting in Utah, the London rallies, what really jumps out is how quickly online organizing can spill into the real world. And sometimes, tragically, into violent confrontations. It's like the speed is accelerating.
That's a really sharp point, the speed of it. It feels like the gap between online talk and offline action is shrinking. But, while some places are dealing with these deep divisions, others are seeing, pretty dramatic shifts in leadership. Look at Nepal.
Ah, yes. Years of frustration there, right? About corruption, weak governance.
Exactly. And it culminated in these youth-led protests, Gen Z protests, they're calling them. And they were deadly, unfortunately. But they forced the resignation of Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli.
And then, around September 12th, 13th, they appointed former Chief Justice Sushila Karki as interim prime minister. It was huge. She's the first woman to lead Nepal.
A landmark appointment. She's pledged reforms, compensation for victims' families. New elections are set for March 5th.
It's a big moment. But the question is, will the entrenched elites actually allow real change? That remains to be seen.
Always the question, isn't it? And speaking of political upheaval and holding power accountable, Brazil had an absolutely extraordinary legal development.
Bolsonaro conviction.
Right. On September 12th, former President Jair Bolsonaro was convicted, sentenced to 27 years in prison. The charge: orchestrating a plot to overthrow the government. The judges ruled he deliberately tried to subvert democracy by inciting military and paramilitary groups.
And international observers, for the most part, praised Brazil's institutions for this, saw it as a win for the rule of law.
It is a pretty powerful statement about democratic resilience, especially after the polarization Brazil went through.
Meanwhile, Switching over to France, President Macron is facing a massive wave of dissent.
Yeah, huge protests under the banner Block Everything. They erupted in cities all across France on September 12th and 13th. We saw strikes, road blockades, big demonstrations. It paralyzed transport, commerce.
And the protesters are pointing to what they call undemocratic reforms. Critics are accusing Macron of basically ignoring the public will.
Oh.
This feels like more than just usual protests. It feels like a critical moment that could really define the rest of his presidency.
It certainly seems that way. Just quickly, back in the U.S., there were other domestic flashpoints, too.
Right, you mentioned some security issues and policy clashes.
Yeah, on September 12th, several U.S. college campuses went into lockdown. There was a string of emailed threats, reports of shooters. Authorities are investigating them as possibly coordinated online hoaxes. Really disruptive and frightening.
And then there was that federal appeals court ruling also on the 12th.
Yes, allowing the Trump administration to again suspend Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood. That just poured fuel on the fire of the national divide over reproductive rights.
And President Trump's announcement about the National Guard, sending them to Memphis instead of Chicago.
That kicked up controversy, too. Also on the 12th, the mayor of Memphis publicly said he hadn't requested the troops. It just highlights that ongoing tension, doesn't it, between local and federal authorities over how to handle crime, who's in charge.
Yeah, it really feels like a moment globally where the fragility of just civil conversation, democratic norms, it's all being tested, really tested.
I agree. It feels quite precarious in many places.
Okay, so from those internal political fault lines, let's zoom out. Let's look at the international stage, because this is where things get really interesting. The global chessboard seems to be shifting fast.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is just the sheer diplomatic intensity, especially around the Israel-Palestine conflict. On September 12th, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution. It reaffirmed the two-state solution as, quote, the only viable path. But it also urged an immediate ceasefire, release of prisoners, and full humanitarian access in Gaza. Pretty strong language.
And this happened right after Israel struck targets in Qatar earlier in the week, which is unusual. Right, widening the war geographically like that.
Very unusual. Israeli officials said they were hitting Hamas-linked assets. Doha, understandably, called it a violation of sovereignty.
And this really raises that crucial question, doesn't it? The risk of regional destabilization. Gulf states warned about strikes spreading beyond Gaza.
Absolutely. And you see the U.S. trying to manage this. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is heading to Israel on September 14th. Washington's clearly trying to contain the fallout.
Shifting focus to Eastern Europe, the war in Ukraine, that also saw a significant escalation.
It did. Ukraine has been trying to push the war's reach into Russia since 2022, basically. And that strategy really accelerated this week. On September 13th, Ukraine launched new drone waves, targets in Russia's Kaluga and Lipetsk regions, also an oil facility hit in Tatarstan.
Russian officials claimed, their air defenses shot down many drones. But Ukrainian intelligence sources were touting successful strikes on fuel, military assets.
And Russia retaliated the same day, firing on Ukraine's Sumy region, killing civilians. It just underscores that brutal, attritional pattern of the war.
And the international reaction, focusing on the economic impact of hitting Russia's energy infrastructure and, of course, the risks of escalation.
But the stakes got, considerably higher when the conflict literally touched a NATO border.
Right. This was the Polish airspace incident.
Exactly. On September 12th and 13th, Russian military drones reportedly violated Polish airspace. That triggered an emergency NATO response. Poland demanded support.
And NATO acted quickly, activated a new defensive posture, deployed more surveillance fighter jets, bolstering that eastern flank.
Yeah, this close call has definitely increased fears of a direct NATO-Russia clash. The potential consequences are huge.
It really shows how interconnected these conflicts are, doesn't it? For the Middle East to Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And the margin for error just feels razor thin right now.
Absolutely. And that interconnectedness loops right back into domestic politics, too. Look at the U.S. House. On September 12th, Republicans moved a stopgap funding bill.
The one without the Ukraine aid.
Exactly. They omitted the additional Ukraine aid, apparently to improve its chances of passing within their own party ranks. This is happening even while Senate leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, favor continuing support for Kyiv.
It just highlights these deep divisions within the U.S. about its role and commitments abroad. Europe is watching this very closely.
Oh, for sure. U.S. aid packages often act as a catalyst for allied contributions. So any wavering there has ripple effects. And also, related to alliances, Canada announced on September 13th it was reevaluating its ties to Israel after that Qatar attack, citing security concerns.
So it's not just about the big powers. Other countries are reassessing relationships based on these rapidly changing events.
It really feels like a moment where boundaries are being tested everywhere and long-standing alliances are under serious reexamination.
Okay, let's pivot now. Let's talk economics, innovation, and the constant dance with regulation. Some big moves here, too,
Yeah.
especially in tech.
Definitely. That AI-driven market rally, it just kept going. On September 12th, the Nasdaq hit a record close, mostly driven by, well, optimism about the Fed, maybe cutting rates, and just ongoing AI enthusiasm. Markets seem to be pricing in a 25 basis point rate cut from the Fed next week.
But the really big tech news, arguably, was Microsoft and OpenAI.
Oh, yeah. Huge. On September 11th and 12th, they announced this non-binding Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, basically to define the next phase of their partnership.
And this clears the way for OpenAI to restructure,
Right.
become a regular for-profit company.
Essentially, yes, while keeping some kind of nonprofit oversight. But it's a massive shift. Microsoft shares went up, obviously. But observers are saying this could change everything in generative AI. Pricing, who gets access, how fast new products roll out.
It raises so many questions, too, about the original mission, right?
Yeah.
Safe AI development versus commercial pressure.
Exactly. Massive implications there. And staying with tech, but on the consumer side, Apple's still Apple.
iPhone 17 launch.
Yeah. Starting September 13th, pre-order trackers showed some of the Pro and Pro Max models already slipping into late September, even October delivery dates. Demand is surging. Analysts are noting higher average selling prices, people leaning towards the Pro models.
And the draws seem to be camera, battery improvements, and tighter AI integration. No surprise there.
AI is everywhere. But linking back to geopolitics, even these conflicts impact the economy directly. Remember that Ukrainian drone attack on the Russian oil terminal?
Primorsk, right, on the 12th?
Yeah. Oil prices jumped right after that because it temporarily stopped loadings at Russia's biggest Baltic crude terminal.
But those gains didn't last long, did they?
No, they faded pretty quick. Concerns about U.S. demand, fears of oversupply as OPEC Plus starts unwinding its production cuts. Analysts think these competing forces might keep crude oil prices kind of stuck in a range for a bit. Volatile, interconnected.
And the U.S.-China tech competition. That's still heating up, too.
Oh, yeah. On September 13th, China's Ministry of Commerce launched 2 new investigations into U.S. chips. One alleges the U.S. is dumping certain analog chips. The other accuses the U.S. of discriminatory trade practices against Chinese semiconductor firms.
And the timing is interesting, right? Just before new U.S.-China talks were scheduled in Madrid, seems like they're ratcheting up the pressure.
Definitely adds pressure. Both economies are dealing with slower growth, these really sensitive tech dependencies. Business groups are warning, more restrictions could just fragment supply chains further, raise costs for everyone.
It's such a delicate balance. And speaking of regulation and complexity, the SEC climate rule.
Right. This raises that important question about how regulators handle these big, complex issues when they're facing legal challenges. On September 12th, the SEC paused its climate risk disclosure rule, basically hit pause while the court cases proceed.
So, delaying the implementation of emissions reporting, climate risk metrics for public companies.
Exactly, and the reaction was split, as you'd expect. Climate-focused investors were not happy, saying it hurts market transparency. Industry groups were relieved, welcomed the reprieve.
And legal scholars are pointing to this,
Yeah.
saying it's an example of this major questions doctrine in action.
Yeah, that's the idea that courts should be wary of agencies making huge policy changes without really explicit permission from Congress. It just highlights that complex dance, between innovation, market forces, and the regulators trying to keep up or set boundaries.
Okay, our final segment. Let's turn to some really pressing human and environmental challenges. Stories that show both our vulnerability, but also sometimes our resilience.
And this past week saw some major legal shifts affecting migrants in the U.S., hundreds of thousands of people. On September 12th, a federal appeals court decision. It allowed the administration to end certain parole-related protections. This affects roughly 430,000 migrants, and it has immediate impacts on their work permits, their risk of deportation.
Immigrant rights groups are sounding the alarm, warning about job losses, families being separated. While some states argued the original program went beyond what the law allowed, the Justice Department said they were reviewing what to do next.
It's just, the uncertainty is immense for those families. The legal ground shifts so fast. And then there was another case on the 13th. A federal judge really questioned a U.S. practice. deporting West African migrants to Ghana first.
Where they might then be sent back to their home countries, even if a U.S. court said they had protection.
Exactly. Even if they have fear-based protections granted by U.S. courts, advocates call it chain refoulement. It basically circumvents the protection orders. The judge was clearly concerned, ordered the government to explain how they'd prevent this, like, immediately. By that evening...
And tragically, there was also that incident in Maryland. An ICE officer shooting and killing an undocumented man.
Yeah, on September 12th, during an attempted arrest. Apparently, the officer was dragged by the suspect's car for some distance. Federal authorities said the officer feared for his life. But advocacy groups are demanding an independent investigation.
And it just immediately reignited that whole incredibly contentious debate about immigration enforcement, use of deadly force.
Yeah, a deeply fraught issue, yeah. Shifting to environmental issues. This one was genuinely alarming. We know wildfire smoke is bad for air quality.
Of course. We experience it more and more.
But a new study, peer-reviewed, released on September 13th, it put a stark global number on it. It found a direct link between smoke from Canadian wildfires and thousands of deaths worldwide.
Thousands. Worldwide.
Yes, especially in areas where air quality infrastructure is already weak. They use advanced satellite data, health data. The scale of it apparently shocked public health agencies.
Wow. That just, it renews those demands for global climate action, better wildfire management, doesn't it? It really underscores how a regional disaster now has clear, measurable, deadly international consequences.
Absolutely. Our planet's health is interconnected. What happens in one place affects others, sometimes drastically. And linking to public health more broadly, the World Health Organization, the WHO, issued a pretty stark warning on September 12th.
About cholera.
Yes, large simultaneous cholera outbreaks happening across multiple regions, which is unusual and worrying. Mortality rates are high where people lack access to treatment, clean water.
And experts are warning that climate change, extreme weather, displacement, it's just going to keep making this worse without big investments in infrastructure.
It's another sign of how environmental stress and health crises are linked, especially impacting vulnerable populations.
On a different note, nature also reminded us of its raw power this week.
The earthquake off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, magnitude 7.4 on September 13th. It triggered a tsunami warning, but thankfully that was later canceled.
Early reports suggested limited damage, which is good news. But it served as a real-world test for new detection systems, didn't it? NASA was highlighting recent progress in tsunami monitoring tech.
Yeah, and seismologists point out that region has a history. It justifies ongoing investment in early warning systems, resilient building. We still need to be prepared.
Okay, just a few miscellaneous notes to wrap up this section.
Sure. SpaceX hit a milestone. Its 300th Starlink mission launched on September 13th. 24 more satellites for global broadband. Rapid innovation, definitely. But it also fuels those debates about orbital debris, who gets to use the radio spectrum.
Right. And there was that incident with the JetBlue plane.
Yeah, minor, thankfully. At Richmond Airport on the 12th, a plane clipped the window of a terminal restaurant while taxiing. Minor injuries, no fatalities, but it prompted a safety review.
And finally, the U.S. observed the 24th anniversary of 9/11.
Yes, on September 11th and 12th. Memorials across the country. And President Trump announced that Charlie Kirk would receive a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom for his activism.
It's just a reminder, isn't it? Even amidst all this global upheaval, technological leaps, the quiet moments of remembrance, they continue.
They do. Human life in all its complexity.
Wow. Okay, what a week we've covered. I mean, from the shock of the Charlie Kirk assassination and its fallout, these global protests,
to the major geopolitical maneuvering in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, that potential NATO-Russia friction.
and those huge tech deals like Microsoft and OpenAI reshaping AI's future.
And we can't forget those quieter but maybe even more pervasive threats, right? The climate-driven mortality from wildfire smoke, the cholera outbreaks.
Plus the ongoing legal battles over immigration, over regulation.
It really is a testament to how interconnected everything is. An event in one corner truly can echo across continents, impact your daily life.
So what does this all mean for you listening? It means that understanding these threads, seeing how they connect even when they seem unrelated at first, it gives you a much richer, more nuanced view of the world. You're not just getting headlines, you're getting depth. You're deeply informed.
Precisely. You're equipped to see the bigger picture. And if we pull back and look at everything we've discussed today, it really brings up an important question, I think. In a world where, deepfake disinformation can spread just as fast as a real video, where a local political act can ignite global debate almost instantly. How do we, as individuals, develop the critical thinking, the discernment needed to navigate all these complex narratives? And ultimately, how do we contribute meaningfully to shaping a better future?
That's a great question. Something definitely for you to mull over as you go about your week.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for diving deep with us today. We really hope you feel more equipped to navigate the complexities of our world. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep learning.